Did you know? Workplace accidents are 60% more likely to happen during night shifts, where fatigue, isolation, and eerie silence add to the risk. But sometimes it's not just accidents causing the fear. Night shifts hold a unique terror: dark, empty hallways, strange noises in the silence, and shadows lurking just beyond the light. For night workers, it's not just the isolation and fatigue. Sometimes it's the feeling that they're not alone. Working the night shift means stepping into a world that feels disconnected from reality. The isolation is heavy, empty corridors stretching out in the dim light, every sound amplified in the silence. You're on edge, hearing creaks, footsteps that don't belong, doors closing with no one around. Some workers have reported cold, unexplainable chills or glimpses of shadows slipping around corners. There's an unsettling mix of exhaustion and hyper-awareness. And in those moments, it's hard to shake the feeling that something or someone is watching from the darkness, waiting. I'd always been the night shift guy. I preferred the quiet, the solitude, and the ability to focus without distractions. Working the front desk at an old hospital on the outskirts of town was never glamorous, but it paid the bills. Most nights, I didn't mind it at all. But that night changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind of night where the world outside seemed muffled by the constant patter of rain against the windows. The clock read 12:15 a.m. when I sat down at the desk with my coffee, flipping through the dull paperwork that I'd been dreading all week. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting the room in a sickly, pale hue. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the old building. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, but then came the sound. At first, it was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, rhythmic knock 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 from down the hall. I glanced at the clock. 12:30 a.m. No one else was supposed to be on the floor at this hour. The night staff had all gone home hours ago, and the only other people in the building were the patients who were either asleep or unconscious. I leaned back in my chair, trying to brush off the noise. The building was old, creaked, it groaned. No big deal. But the knocking didn't stop. I stood up and walked down the hallway, each step echoing in the silence. The sound was coming from room 304. I stopped in front of the door, my heart thumping in my chest. The room was dim, the soft glow of the emergency lights spilling into the hallway from beneath the door. I didn't want to go in. I didn't have a reason to, but something about the sound, that rhythmic knock, pulled me closer. I knocked twice on the door, then slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing the patient inside. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. The patient, a man in his mid-50s who'd been in a coma for the past 3 weeks, lay motionless in the bed. There was no sign of life, no movement, nothing that could explain the noise. Then, suddenly, there was a faint sound, like a low whisper. I leaned in, straining to hear, but it was nothing more than a hum, a soft, unsettling murmur. I stepped closer to the bed, and that's when I saw it. The man's hand. His fingers twitched, barely noticeable, but enough to send a chill down my spine. His eyes, though still closed, seemed to shift beneath the lids. I stepped back, my stomach turning. Was he waking up? No, that was impossible. The doctors had told me that he hadn't shown any signs of brain activity. I reached for the phone, my hands trembling, when the knocking started again. It wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, just the cold, sterile walls of the hallway. The knocking continued, louder now, as if it was following me. Knock, knock, knock. Then it stopped. The silence was deafening. I glanced at the clock. 12:45 a.m. It hadn't been that long since I'd first heard the knocking, but the air in the building had changed, felt heavier, colder. I turned back to the man in the bed, but to my horror, his eyes were now open, wide, unblinking, and staring directly at me. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I took a step back. His eyes weren't just open. They were alive. Alive with something I couldn't explain. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely audible, like it came from a place deep within the earth. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's voice, strained and raw, echoed in my mind, the sound twisting my thoughts. I didn't know what to do, whether to run or to stay. I was frozen. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the man's eyes shut again, and the room fell back into an unnatural stillness. His hand, which had twitched moments ago, lay lifeless by his side. I couldn't bring myself to look at him any longer. I hurried out of the room and made my way back to the desk, my breath shallow, my head spinning. The knocks had stopped, but the echoes of that voice, it lingered in my ears. The rest of the night passed in a blur, but I never went back to room 304. Couldn't. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., I left without looking back. The hospital was still the same, but something had changed in me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, had reached out from beyond, desperate for help, and I had failed them. Weeks later, I heard the news. The man had passed away. His body had simply given up in the night, and no one could explain how or why. But I knew. I'd heard his voice. I'd felt the desperation in his plea. And every night since then, when I'm alone in the quiet of the night shift, I still hear it. The knocking, the whispering, the voice calling out to me from the darkness. I just hope it's not too late to answer. If you've ever worked a night shift, you know that eerie feeling when the world goes quiet and you're left alone with your thoughts. Have you experienced anything unsettling during those late hours? Maybe a strange noise or a moment where you felt like someone or something was watching you? Drop your thoughts or share your own experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And if you're interested in more spine-chilling tales from the workplace, don't forget to check out our next video, where we dive into even darker stories of the things that haunt us while we work. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.